The history of Joshua begins with a moment of transition. The people of Israel were at the gates of the Promised Land, but their leader, Moses, could not take them inside it. For 40 years, they had been wandering in the desert, waiting for the correct moment to enter Canaan. Now, with Moses deceased, God would choose a new leader to guide his people in the conquest of the land he had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That man was Joshua, son of Nun, who had been Moses' assistant since his youth. He was among the 12 spies sent to explore the land 40 years before, and was one of the only ones, along with Caleb, to bring a report full of faith. Now, Joshua would face the greatest challenge of his life, guiding an entire nation to conquer a land occupied by warrior and fortified peoples. After the death of Moses, silence seemed to cover the Israelite camp. It was a moment of mourning and also of uncertainty. Who would guide the people now? God did not let much time pass to answer that question. In chapter 1, verses 1 and 2 of the book of Joshua, it tells us, "After the death of Moses, servant of the Lord, God spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, and said to him, 'My servant Moses is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you and all the people to cross the Jordan River to enter the land that I will give to you, the Israelites.'" This call did not come to a stranger. Joshua had been prepared for decades for this moment. When he was younger, he had fought against the Amalekites while Moses raised his hands in prayer. The book of Exodus, in chapter 17, verse 13, tells us, "Joshua defeated the Amalekites and finished them off at the edge of the sword." He had also accompanied Moses partially in his ascent to Mount Sinai to receive the commandments, as we read in Exodus, chapter 24, verse 13. Moses rose along with Joshua, his assistant, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. During the time in the desert, Joshua had always been close to Moses, learning from his leadership and his relationship with God. In Exodus, chapter 33, verse 11, it tells us that when Moses entered the tent of meeting to speak with the Lord, his young assistant Joshua, son of Nun, never left the tent. This closeness with God and with Moses had prepared him for the moment when he would receive the divine call. But being named Moses' successor was not a small thing. Moses had been the deliverer, the one who brought the people out of Egypt, the one who received the law, the mediator between God and the people. Joshua had to assume a leadership no longer as an assistant, but as the main authority. That is why God speaks directly to him in Joshua. Chapter 1, verse 2. "My servant Moses is dead." It was the end of an era and the beginning of another. He would no longer be under the shadow of Moses. Now, he would be the one to direct the people. With the call came also the renewal of the promise. God was not asking Joshua to invent a plan of his own or to decide where to go. The mission was already clear. Enter and conquer the land that God had promised centuries before to Abraham in Joshua. Chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. The Lord says to him, "I will give to you every place that your feet touch. Just as I promised Moses, your territory will extend from the desert and Lebanon to the great river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and up to the Mediterranean Sea in the west." This promise was not new. God had made it first to Abraham when he told him in Genesis chapter 15, verse 18, "To your descendants I will give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates." For generations, the Israelites had lived with this promise in their hearts. One day, they would have a land of their own where they could settle and prosper. But the most impressive thing about this renewed promise is that God assures Joshua that the victory is guaranteed. In Joshua, chapter 1, verse 5, it says, "No one will be able to face you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. I will not leave you nor forsake you." This did not mean there would not be battles or challenges. There would be many, but the final result was already decided by God. They would triumph. This promise was not only territorial, but also spiritual. God was renewing his covenant with Israel. He had not brought them to this point to abandon them, despite the complaints, the rebellions, and the unbelief that they had shown during the 40 years in the desert. God continued to be faithful to his word. Now, with a new generation ready to enter the land, God reaffirmed his commitment. For Joshua, this meant that he was not going alone. The same God who had been with Moses, opening the Red Sea, sending manna from heaven and water from the rock, that same God would be with him. He did not have to fear that his leadership would be less powerful or blessed than that of Moses, liderar a un numeroso. Leading a numerous people and facing powerful enemies was not an easy task. God knew that Joshua would need more than just the promise of victory. He would need inner strength. Therefore, the divine message continues with words that would be repeated several times. In Joshua, chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "Be strong and courageous." This mandate to be strong and courageous appears 3 times in this initial conversation. First, in relation to the conquest of the land. In Joshua, chapter 1, verse 6, we read, "Be strong and courageous, because you will cause this people to inherit the land that I promised to their ancestors." Second, in relation to obedience to the law. In chapter 1, verse 7, it says, "I only ask that you have much courage and firmness to obey all the law that my servant Moses ordered you to fulfill." And third, as a general reminder accompanied by the promise of the divine presence. Chapter 1, verse 9, tells us, "I have already ordered you, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, because the Lord your God will accompany you wherever you go." This repetition was not accidental. God knew that fear and discouragement would be the greatest threats for Joshua and for the people. The enemies they would face were real and powerful. The cities they were supposed to conquer were fortified. The peoples inhabiting the land were numerous and experienced in war. All this could generate fear, but the strength God asked for was not only physical, but mainly spiritual. The key to this strength was in constant meditation on the Word of God. In chapter 1, verse 8, the Lord tells Joshua, "Recite the book of the law always, and meditate on it day and night. Fulfill with care everything that is written in it. Thus you will prosper and have success." For Joshua, this would be his compass, his guide. He could not lead the people if he himself was not full of the Word of God. And this meditation was not optional or casual. It had to be constant, day and night. It had to be practical. Fulfill with care everything that is written in it. And it had a promise of success and prosperity. God was not only asking Joshua to be brave and obedient, he was also giving him the tools to achieve it. His word and his presence. With these 2 resources, Joshua could face any challenge that came ahead. With the divine call clear in his mind and heart, Joshua did not waste time. It was time to move an entire people toward the promised land. In chapter 1, verses 10 and 11, it tells us, "Then Joshua ordered the officers of the people, 'Go through the camp and tell the people to prepare provisions, because within 3 days you will cross the Jordan River to enter and take possession of the land that the Lord your God will give you.'" 3 days. That was the deadline. They had to organize everything. They had to prepare food, pack their belongings, dismantle tents, and, most importantly, prepare mentally for what was coming. It was not an excursion or a walk. It was a decisive moment in the history of Israel. Joshua knew that a good leader not only inspires, but also organizes. It would do no good to have the people excited to enter the promised land if they were not logistically ready. That is why his first action was to give clear and specific orders to the officers. They, in turn, would transmit the instructions to the people. The mention of preparing provisions is significant. For 40 years, the Israelites had depended on the manna, that miraculous food that appeared each morning. But now, upon entering the land, they would begin to live differently. They would begin to depend more on what the land would give them. Although always recognizing that everything came from God, the 3 days of preparation would also serve for the people to mentally prepare themselves. They were about to leave behind the nomadic life of the desert and face battles to conquer cities. It was a radical change that required preparation, not only physical, but also emotional and spiritual. Joshua demonstrated his organizational capacity here. He did not wait for things to happen on their own. He took the initiative, gave clear orders, and established a definite deadline. It was a leader in action. A potentially conflicting issue that Joshua had to address immediately was that of the tribes that had already received their land. During the life of Moses, the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had asked for and received territories to the east of the Jordan in Numbers. Chapter 32, verse 1. We see that these tribes had much cattle and saw that the lands of Jasir and Gilead were good for grazing. That is why they asked to settle there instead of crossing the Jordan. Moses had agreed to this request, but with a crucial condition. These tribes had to accompany their brothers in the conquest of the land to the west of the Jordan before settling definitively in their own territories. Now, Joshua reminded them of this commitment. In Joshua, chapter 1, verses 12 to 15, we read, "To the Reubenites, to the Gadites, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh," Joshua said, "remember what Moses, servant of the Lord, ordered you. The Lord your God has given you rest and has delivered this land to you. Your wives, your children, and your cattle can stay in the land that Moses delivered to you to the east of the Jordan. But all your well-armed warriors must cross ahead of your brothers. You will help them until the Lord gives rest to them, as he has given to you, and until they also take possession of the land that the Lord your God gives them afterwards. You may return to take possession of the land that belongs to you, that Moses, servant of the Lord, delivered to you to the east of the Jordan, where the sun rises." This reminder was important for several reasons. First, it showed that Joshua knew the prior agreements well and was determined to enforce them. Second, it ensured that Israel would fight with all its strength, including the tribes that already had their inheritance. And third, it avoided any possible division between the tribes, which could have weakened the nation at a crucial moment. The response of these tribes was exemplary. In chapter 1, verses 16 to 18, they answered, "We will do everything you have ordered us, and we will go wherever you send us. Just as we obeyed Moses in everything, we will also obey you. May the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Anyone who rebels against your command, or does not obey anything you order him, will be sentenced to death. Only we ask that you have courage and firmness." It was a powerful declaration of loyalty. Not only were they willing to fulfill their part of the agreement, but they also recognized Joshua as the legitimate successor of Moses. Their commitment included accepting his authority and following his orders. going even so far as to suggest the death penalty for whoever rebelled against Joshua. The most impressive thing is that they themselves repeat to Joshua the words that God had said to him. Only we ask that you have courage and firmness. This showed that the people were aligned with the divine vision and willing to support their new leader. With the people preparing to cross the Jordan and the eastern tribes committed to fighting alongside their brothers, Joshua decided to send spies to reconnoiter the land, especially Jericho, the first city they should conquer. In chapter 2, verse 1, we read, Joshua, son of Nun, sent secretly from Shittim 2 spies with the following order. Go and explore the territory, especially Jericho. The spies went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. This decision by Joshua recalls the episode of the 12 spies sent by Moses, of which he himself had been a part. But there were important differences. This time he sent only 2 men, not 12, and he did so secretly, without announcing it publicly. This suggests that Joshua wanted strategic information without alerting either the enemies or the people themselves, thus avoiding possible fears or rumors. The choice of Jericho as the main objective was not accidental. This city was like a gateway to the Promised Land. It was well fortified, and its conquest would be a clear message, both to the Israelites and to the Canaanite peoples. The fact that the spies stayed in the house of a prostitute might seem strange at first glance, but from a strategic point of view, it made sense. Rahab's house was on the city wall, which would facilitate a possible escape. Besides, it was a place where the presence of strangers would not call too much attention. What the spies could not know is that this decision, seemingly practical, would be part of the divine plan to save a woman and her family, who would later form part of the people of Israel and even of the genealogical line of the Messiah. The mission of the spies had an initial stumble. In chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, it tells us, but someone informed the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to explore the territory. But then the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who arrived at your house, because they have come to explore the entire country. It was a dangerous situation. The spies had been discovered, and the king was looking for them. If they found them, not only would they be in danger, but all of Joshua's operation could be compromised. But God had a plan that included an unexpected woman. Rahab, a prostitute of Jericho, became the savior of the Israelite spies. Her decision to protect them would change the course of her life forever. In chapter 2, verses 4 to 7, we read her astute action. But the woman had hidden the 2 men. Yes, it is true that those men came to my house, acknowledged she. But I did not know where they were from. At nightfall, when the city gate was about to close, they left, and I do not know where. Go quickly after them, that you can still catch them. But she had taken them to the roof and had hidden them under some bundles of flax that she had put there. So the men of the king went out chasing the spies by the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers left, the city gates were closed. Rahab showed extraordinary bravery. Lying to the king could cost her life. Hiding enemy spies was treason, but something in her led her to make this risky decision. What follows is even more surprising. Rahab not only hid the spies, she also explained to them why she was doing it. In chapter 2, verses 8 to 11, she confesses her faith before the spies fell asleep. Rahab went up to the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land. Truly, the terror you inspire in us has taken hold of us, and all the inhabitants of the country tremble before you, because we have found out how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea so you could pass when you left Egypt. and also what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings to the east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. Upon hearing that, we all lost heart. Because of you, we have lost our courage, because the Lord your God is God above in the heavens and below on the earth. This declaration is astonishing. Rahab, a Canaanite woman, was proclaiming her faith in the God of Israel. She had heard of his powerful works and had reached the correct conclusion. The Lord was not simply a local or tribal God. He was God above in the heavens and below on the earth. This recognition put her in a category apart from her compatriots. While they trembled with fear, she trembled with faith. It is noteworthy that the events Rahab mentions, the crossing of the Red Sea and the defeat of Sihon and Og, had happened 40 years before. Nevertheless, these stories remained alive in the memory of the Canaanites, causing fear. For Rahab, those stories led her to faith in the true God. After confessing her faith, Rahab proceeds to ask for protection for herself and her family. In chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, she says, "So now I beg you to swear to me by the Lord, that just as I have treated you with kindness, you also will treat my family with kindness. Give me a sure sign that you will respect the life of my father and my mother, and those of my brothers and sisters, and of all who belong to them, and that you will deliver us from death." It is touching to see how Rahab, in the middle of her own dangerous situation, thinks of her family. She not only wants to save herself, she wants to save all her loved ones, and bases her request on reciprocity. She had shown kindness to the spies. Now she asks that that kindness be extended to her family. The spies respond positively to her request. In chapter 2, verse 14, they tell her, "Our life for yours," responded they. "If you do not betray us, we will treat you with kindness and loyalty when the Lord gives us this land." To God, it was a solemn promise. Our life for yours. If they did not keep their word, they would be willing to pay with their own lives. But they add a condition. If you do not betray us. Rahab had to keep the secret of their visit and their escape. The trust had to be mutual. The escape of the spies was ingenious. In chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, we read, "Since Rahab's house was next to the wall, she let them down with a rope through the window. 'Go to the mountains,' and indicated she to them. 'So your pursuers do not find you. Hide there 3 days until they return. Then you can continue on your way.'" Rahab not only offered them a means of escape, but also strategic advice to hide in the mountains for 3 days before returning to the Israelite camp. This advice revealed her knowledge of the terrain and the usual search procedures in Jericho. Before leaving, the spies established the precise terms of their agreement. In chapter 2, verses 17 to 20, they say, "We will be free from the oath you made us swear," warned her the men, "unless you do the following. When we enter this land, tie to your window this red cord through which you have let us down. Gather your father and your mother, your brothers, and all your family in your house. If any of them go out into the street, their blood will be on their own head. We will bear no guilt. But if you lay a hand on someone who is with you inside your house, their blood will be on our head. On the other hand, if you betray us, we will be free from the oath you made us swear." This agreement was detailed and specific. The red cord in the window would be the sign for the Israelites that that house must be preserved. All members of Rahab's family had to be inside the house to be protected. If they went out, the spies would not be responsible for what happened to them. And finally, if Rahab betrayed them, the agreement would be annulled. Rahab accepts these conditions and seals the agreement. In chapter 2, verse 21, We read, "Agreed," responded Rahab. "It will be as you say." Then she sent them away. And they left, and she tied the red cord to the window. The red cord has a profound symbolism, just as the blood of the Paschal Lamb marked the Israelite houses in Egypt, saving them from the destroying angel. Now the red cord would mark Rahab's house, saving her from the destruction that would come upon Jericho. This red cord has been seen by many as a symbol of saving faith. The spies returned successfully to the camp. In chapter 2, verses 22 to 24, we read, "When they left, the spies went up to the mountains and stayed there 3 days until their pursuers returned to Jericho after having searched all the roads without finding them. Then the 2 men started their return, came down from the mountains, crossed the river, and presented themselves to Joshua, son of Nun, to whom they told everything that had happened to them. And they assured him, 'Certainly the Lord has given the whole country into our hands. All its inhabitants tremble with fear before us.'" The report of the spies to Joshua was totally positive, unlike the discouraging report that 10 of the 12 spies had brought 40 years before. Certainly the Lord has given the whole country into our hands," said they. Their trust was not in their own strength or strategy, but in what they had seen. God was already working in the hearts of the inhabitants of the land, filling them with fear before Israel. This episode with Rahab and the spies shows how God was preparing the way for the conquest of Jericho before the people even crossed the Jordan. It also reveals how God can use unexpected people, like a Canaanite prostitute, to fulfill his purposes. The story of Rahab is a powerful testimony of how faith can flourish in the most improbable places. The morning arrived with a special energy in the camp of Israel. After 40 years of walking through the desert, they were finally about to enter the promised land. Joshua woke up early. He knew this day would be engraved forever in the history of his people. The night before, the spies had returned with good news. Now was the time to move. In chapter 3, verses 1 to 4, the Bible tells us, "Joshua rose very early, and along with all the Israelites, set out from Shittim and arrived at the Jordan, where they camped before crossing it. At the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and gave this order to the people. 'When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, set out from where you are and follow it. Thus you will know what path to take. For you have never passed that way before. But leave a distance of about 900 meters between you and the ark. Do not come near it.'" The Ark of the Covenant was the most sacred symbol for Israel. It represented the very presence of God among them. That is why they had to maintain a respectful distance. It was not out of fear, but out of reverence. God was going ahead of them, opening the path toward the land he had promised them. Joshua continued giving clear instructions to the people. In verses 5 and 6 of the same chapter, he told them, "Purify yourselves, because tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Then he ordered the priests, "Take the Ark of the Covenant and go ahead of the people." And they took the Ark of the Covenant and walked ahead of the people. Purification was important. It was not just about washing with water, but about preparing spiritually to see the power of God in action. It was a solemn moment that required clean hearts and attentive minds. Joshua wanted everyone to be ready to witness the wonders that God would do. But Joshua not only gave instructions to the people, he also needed encouragement and confirmation from God. And the Lord did not disappoint him. In verses 7 and 8, God tells him, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that just as I was with Moses, I am also with you. Command the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant that when they reach the edge of the Jordan, they step into the water and stand there. These words must have filled Joshua with confidence. God not only promised him success in the mission, but also recognition before all the people. He would be exalted not for his personal glory, but so everyone would know that God was with him, just as he had been with Moses. With that assurance, Joshua gathered all Israel to share what was about to happen. In verses 9 to 13, he explained, "Draw near and listen to what the Lord, your God, is going to tell you. Thus you will know that the living God is among you, and that, without a doubt, he will drive out from this land the Canaanites, Hittites, Hebrew, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. Look, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is going to cross the Jordan ahead of you. Now, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. When the priests who carry the ark of the Lord, the God of all the earth, put their feet in the waters of the Jordan, the current will stop and the water will pile up, forming a dam." Joshua did not hide what would happen. He anticipated the miracle they would see. The waters of the Jordan would stop when the priests with the ark put their feet in them. It was a clear and specific promise that would soon be fulfilled before their eyes. He also explained the purpose of choosing 12 men, one from each tribe. Although at that moment, he did not tell them exactly what these 12 men would do. He was preparing everything according to the instructions of God. Finally, everything was ready. The people had received the instructions. The priests knew their role, and the 12 special men had been selected. The decisive moment had arrived. Israel was about to witness a demonstration of divine power that they would never forget. The expectation grew while the tents were dismantled, and families gathered their belongings. It was time to march. The Bible shows us this scene with vivid details in chapter 3, verses 14 to 16. When the people parted, set out from their tents to cross the Jordan, the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant went ahead. At that time, during the harvest, the Jordan overflows all its banks. However, when the priests who carried the ark arrived at the Jordan and their feet touched the edge of the water, the current that came from above stopped, forming a dam at a great distance near the city of Adam, which is near Zaretan. The current that went down toward the Sea of the Arabah, that is, the Dead Sea, was cut off completely. In this way, the people crossed opposite Jericho. This was not a small river that could be jumped over. The Jordan was at its highest point, overflowing all its banks due to the harvest season. Crossing it at that moment seemed impossible, especially for such a large group that included elderly, women, and children. But the impossible moment is when God shows his power. What is asombroso? Astonishing is the precision of the miracle. At the exact instant in which the feet of the priests touched the water, the current stopped. It was not something gradual or partial. The water piled up like a dam at a great distance near the city of Adam, and the part that went toward the Dead Sea was cut off completely, leaving a dry path in the middle of the river. Imagine the scene, thousands of people looking astonished as the noisy and turbulent waters suddenly freeze in place, as if an invisible hand had stopped them. It was not the dramatic division of the Red Sea with walls of water on both sides, but a clean cut of the current, leaving the riverbed exposed and dry. But the miracle did not end there. What was most impressive was what happened next. As verse 17 tells us, the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan on dry ground, while all Israel passed over on dry ground until the entire nation finished crossing the Jordan. Not only did the water stop, but the riverbed dried up instantaneously. There were no mud or puddles where the people could slip or sink. It was dry ground, firm and secure to walk on, and the priests with the ark remained firmly planted in the middle of the river, as a visible symbol that it was God who kept the waters separated. While the Israelite families passed, they could see the priests holding the ark in the center of the channel. The children perhaps pointed with astonishment at the walls of water stopped in the distance. The elders would remember similar stories of the crossing of the Red Sea and would marvel that now they too were experiencing a similar miracle. The passage of all Israel must have taken hours. They were hundreds of thousands of people with all their belongings, livestock, and provisions. During all that time, the waters remained stopped. There was no hurry or panic, only an orderly movement of a nation following its God toward the Promised Land. This miraculous crossing of the Jordan had a purpose beyond the simple physical passage. As Joshua would explain later, it was a testimony to the world when other nations heard how the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan. They would know that the God of Israel was powerful and that his hand was with his people. For the Israelites, it was the definitive confirmation that God was with Joshua as he had been with Moses. There was no longer any doubt that this was the leader chosen by God to lead them to possess the land. While the people crossed, God gave Joshua specific instructions to create a memorial of this extraordinary event. In chapter 4, verses 1 to 3, we read, "When the entire nation finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Choose 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and order them to collect 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the feet of the priests stand. Take them and place them in the place where you camp tonight.'" Now it was clear why Joshua had previously selected 12 men. Each one represented a tribe of Israel, and together they would form part of a symbolic act to preserve the memory of this day. Joshua did not waste time in transmitting these orders. In verses 4 to 7, he says, "Then Joshua called the 12 men he had chosen among the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, 'Pass towards the ark of the Lord, your God, to the middle of the Jordan, and each of you load a stone on his shoulder, in accordance with the number of the Israelite tribes. This will serve as a sign among you in the future. When your children ask you, "What do these stones mean?" you will answer them, that the water of the Jordan divided before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When the ark crossed the Jordan, the waters of the river divided. These stones will serve to the Israelites as a memorial forever." These stones were not simple memories. They were educational tools for future generations. Joshua knew that the children who would be born in the Promised Land would not have experienced either the exodus from Egypt or the crossing of the Jordan. They would need something tangible that would awaken their curiosity and open the door to tell them the stories of how God had guided his people. The Bible tells us that the Israelites obeyed these instructions to the letter. The Israelites did what Joshua ordered them. In accordance with the number of the Israelite tribes, they collected 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, just as the Lord had told Joshua, and took them to the camp where they deposited them. Verse 8, "But Joshua did not settle for a single memorial." In verses 9 and 10, we read, "Joshua also placed 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood, and there they have remained to this day. The priests who carried the Ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything that the Lord had ordered Joshua to tell the people was fulfilled. In accordance with what Moses had ordered Joshua, the people crossed hurriedly. This second memorial placed in the middle of the river Jordan would probably be visible only when the river was at its lowest level. It would be like a secret between God and his people, a testimony submerged most of the time, but occasionally revealed, reminding them of the miracle. The passage of the people was quick, but orderly. There was no confusion or chaos. Everyone followed the instructions, moved by the excitement of finally stepping on the land that God had promised them. Once everyone crossed, the most dramatic moment arrived, as described in verses 15 to 18. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Order the priests who carry the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan." And Joshua ordered the priests, "Come up from the Jordan." When the priests who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the middle of the Jordan, and their feet stepped on dry land, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all their banks as before. The miracle ended as abruptly as it had begun, in the moment in which the feet of the priests touched dry land on the western shore. The waters returned with force, overflowing again. Anyone who had been left behind would have been swept away by the current. But everyone was safe, and the miracle had concluded its purpose. The exact date of this event remained registered. The people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped in Gilgal, at the eastern limit of Jericho. Verse 19. It was a significant date, just 4 days before the Passover, recalling how God had liberated them from Egypt and now brought them to the Promised Land. Finally, the purpose of the memorials remained clear in the words of Joshua to the people in verses 21 to 24. And he said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your children ask you what these stones mean, you will explain, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry land, because the Lord, your God, dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had passed, just as the Lord, your God, had done with the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we passed. He did it so that all the peoples of the earth know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you always fear the Lord, your God." The stones would serve as bridges between generations, ensuring that the history of the power of God would not be lost. Also, they would be a declaration to all nations that the God of Israel had power over nature itself. And for Israel, they would be a constant reminder that they should live in reverence and obedience to this so powerful God who had divided the waters for them. After crossing the Jordan, Israel camped in Gilgal, to the east of Jericho. This would be their base of operations for the coming conquests. But before facing their enemies, they needed to put themselves in order spiritually. God knew that external victory begins with internal obedience. The first important matter they needed to attend to was circumcision. In chapter 5, verses 2 to 7, we read, "In that time, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again.' So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites in Gibeah Haraloth. The motive for which he did it was that all those who had come out of Egypt, that is, all the men fit for war, had died in the desert after leaving Egypt. All those who had come out were circumcised, but none of those born in the desert during the journey after leaving Egypt had been circumcised. During 40 years, the Israelites walked through the desert until died all the generation of the men fit for war, who had come out of Egypt for not having obeyed the Lord, because the Lord had sworn to them that he would not permit them to see the land that he had promised to their ancestors, land where milk and honey abound. In place of them he put their children, and them Joshua circumcised. They had not been circumcised because nobody had circumcised them during the journey. This situation was surprising. A whole generation of Israelites had been born in the desert without being circumcised. The circumcision was the physical sign of the covenant between God and his people since the times of Abraham. It was like carrying the mark of belonging to God in the body. Why had this rite not been fulfilled for 40 years? The Bible does not give us an explicit reason, but suggests it was related to the state of rebellion and disobedience of the first generation. Perhaps by being under divine judgment in Al-Jumhur, desert, they were not in a position to continue with the practices of the covenant. But now, with a new generation ready to enter the land, It was time to renew all the signs of their relationship with God. And the first of them was circumcision. It must have been a painful process for the adult men. In verse 8, it is told to us. When they finished circumcising all the men of the nation, these stayed in their places in the camp until they healed. It was necessary a time of recovery before they could continue. But this temporary pain was necessary for their identity as the people of God. God confirmed that this act of obedience marked a new beginning for them. The Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have taken away from over you the reproach of Egypt." For that reason, that place is called Gilgal to this day. Verse 9. The name Gilgal sounds similar to the Hebrew word for rolling away or making roll. It was as if God had made roll far from them the weight of their Egyptian past and their history of slavery. But the renewal of the alliance was not limited to the circumcision. It also included the celebration of the Passover, the feast that commemorated their liberation from Egypt. In verses 10 and 11, we read, "Being camped in Gilgal, in the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover at sunset of the 14th day of the month. At the day following the Passover, that same day, they ate of the products of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain." It was the first Passover in the Promised Land. 40 years before, their parents had celebrated the first Passover the night before leaving Egypt. Now their children celebrated this feast just after entering the land that God had promised them. The circle had closed. The promise of liberty and of an own land finally had been fulfilled. Besides, for the first time, they were eating the products of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. They no longer depended on the miraculous food of the desert. Now they could enjoy the fruit of the land that God had given them. These acts of circumcision and celebration of the Passover were not simple religious rituals. They were declarations of identity. The Israelites were affirming, "We are the people of the covenant of God. We are the rescued from the slavery of Egypt. We are the heirs of the promise to Abraham." And with each act of obedience to the commandments of God, they prepared themselves spiritually for the battles that they had ahead. During 40 years, Israel had depended on the manna. That miraculous bread that appeared each morning with the dew was sufficient for each day. But it could not be stored, except for the Sabbath. It was a constant reminder that they depended totally on God for their daily sustenance. But now something fundamental changed in their life. In chapter 5, verse 12, we read, "The manna ceased on the following day, when they ate of the products of the land." The Israelites no longer had manna, but that year they ate of the fruits of the land of Canaan. This simple verse marks an important transition. They would no longer see the daily miracle of the manna. Now they would eat what the land produced. This did not mean that God had abandoned them, or that He no longer cared for them. It meant that their relationship with Him entered a new phase. In the desert, the dependence on God was obvious and direct. Without the manna, they would die of hunger in a few days. In the Promised Land, they would continue depending on God, but in a less visible and more normal way. They depended on the rain that He sent, of the fertility that He gave to the land, of the protection against plagues that He provided. They kept needing God to live. But now they would have to recognize His hand in the natural processes, and not only in the evident miracles. This change also meant that now they would have to work the land. The manna appeared without effort. They only had to collect it. But the harvests in Canaan would require planting, watering, waiting, and harvesting. Instead of passive gatherers, they would become active farmers. It was an important lesson. God had given them the land, but they had to work it. God had promised victory over their enemies, but they had to fight the battles. The divine grace did not eliminate the human responsibility. It made it possible and fruitful. The cessation of the manna also marked the end of their stage as nomads of the desert. Now they would settle in cities and towns, cultivate the land, plant vineyards, and build a stable society. Their identity as a people would pass from being the liberated of Egypt to being the inhabitants of the Promised Land. For the Israelites, this change may have been bittersweet. On one side, they were excited to eat new foods, to taste the fruits of a land that flows milk and honey. On the other side, it may be that they felt nostalgia for the daily miracle that they had witnessed for so long. The manna had been a visible symbol of the divine presence and provision, but God knew that it was time to grow. The children receive everything from their parents, but the adults learn to work and contribute. Israel was maturing as a nation, and their relationship with God, Debiah, needed to reflect that maturity. The manna ceased, but the needs of Israel kept being satisfied. God simply had changed the method, not his commitment of caring for them. And although the bread from the sky no longer fell each morning, its memory would remain as a testimony of the fidelity of God during their most difficult time. While Israel prepared for its first big battle in the Promised Land, Joshua received an unexpected visit. In chapter 5, verses 13 to 15, we read, "Being Joshua near Jericho, he lifted his sight and saw a man who was standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua approached him and asked, 'Are you of our part or of part of our enemies?' 'Neither the one nor the other,' responded the man. 'I present myself before you as commander of the army of the Lord.' When then Joshua prostrated himself face to earth and asked, 'What message does my Lord have for this servant of his?' The commander of the army of the Lord answered him, 'Take off your sandals from your feet, because the place that you tread is holy.' And Joshua obeyed. This encounter is one of the most mysterious and significant in the life of Joshua. While he inspected the surroundings of Jericho, perhaps planning the attack strategy, he saw a warrior with a drawn sword. His first reaction was practical and direct, friend or enemy. But the answer that he received changed completely the situation. 'Neither the one nor the other,' said the man. 'Did I present myself before you as commander of the army of the Lord?' It was not an Israelite soldier nor a Canaanite enemy. It was a heavenly messenger, possibly an angel or even a manifestation of the same Lord. The reaction of Joshua was immediate and appropriate. He prostrated himself face to earth, recognizing that he was before someone of divine authority. His question changed from a military evaluation, friend or enemy, to a spiritual submission. 'What message does my Lord have for this servant?' The order that he received resonated with the experience of Moses before the burning bush. 'Take off your sandals from your feet, because the place that you tread is holy.' This parallel was no coincidence. Just as God had commissioned Moses to take Israel out of Egypt, now he was confirming the mission of Joshua to establish Israel in Canaan. This encounter had several important purposes. First, to remind Joshua that the battle for Jericho was not principally his, but of God. The Lord himself, commander of his army, would direct the fight. Second, to transform the vision of Joshua about the conquest. It was not treated simply of Israel against Canaan, but of the Lord of hosts, reclaiming what belonged to him. The Israelites were not autonomous conquerors, but instruments in the hands of God. Third, to prepare Joshua to receive instructions that would seem militarily illogical. The strategy that God would give him to conquer Jericho would not make sense from a purely military perspective. But after this encounter, Joshua would understand that he was not following human tactics, but divine orders. And fourth, to show that the land that they were about to conquer was already holy to God. They did not enter simply to an enemy territory. They entered to a place that the Lord claimed as his. where his presence already was. This encounter changed completely the perspective of Joshua. He no longer saw himself as the general planning an invasion, but as a servant following the orders of the true commander. And with this new perspective, he was ready to receive the strange plan of battle for Jericho. After the encounter with the commander of the army of the Lord, Joshua received detailed instructions about how to conquer Jericho. In chapter 6, verses 1 to 5, we read, "Now then, Jericho was closed from within and from without because of the Israelites. Nobody entered nor left. But the Lord said to Joshua, 'Look, I have delivered into your hands Jericho, its king, and all its warriors. March around the city once with all your men of war. Do it thus during 6 days. 7 priests will carry 7 trumpets of ram horns before the ark. The 7th day, you will march around the city 7 times while the priests blow the trumpets. When you hear a prolonged blast of the trumpets, all the people must launch a strong battle cry, and the wall of the city will collapse. Then the people will attack, each one from where he is.' Jericho was an impressive fortress. Its walls were so thick that, according to some archaeologists, there were houses built on them, like that of Rahab. The city was well prepared for a long siege with its gates closed firmly. From a military perspective, conventional, conquering it would require time, resources, and probably many lives. But the plan of God was completely different. There would be no direct assault, nor siege towers, nor attempts to scale the walls in change. The Israelites simply would walk around the city once a day during 6 days and 7 times the 7th day. Then they would shout and the walls would fall. It was a strategy that did not make sense from the human military point of view. What conquers a city walking in silence around its walls? The defenders of Jericho probably would laugh when seeing them marching day after day without attacking. They could even think that the Israelites had fear or that they did not know how to besiege a city. But this plan had several divine purposes. First, to show that the victory would come by the power of God, not by the force or military ability of Israel. Second, to test the obedience of the people to instructions that seemed strange. And third, to build the faith of Israel with each turn to the city, preparing them for the moment when they would have to shout with absolute confidence. Joshua transmitted these instructions to the priests and the people with precision. In verses 6 and 7 we read, "Joshua, son of Nun, convoked the priests and told them, 'Take the Ark of the Covenant, and let 7 priests with 7 trumpets of ram horns march before the Ark of the Lord.' Then he said to the people, 'Put yourselves in march and surround the city. The armed men will go before the Ark of the Lord.'" It is interesting to note how Joshua organized the procession. In the vanguard would go the armed men as protection. Then would come the 7 priests with the trumpets, followed by the Ark of the Covenant carried by other priests. Finally, behind the Ark would march the rear guard. It was a solemn procession, military and religious at the same time. The instructions about the silence were very important. In verse 10, Joshua orders, "But you will not shout, nor let your voice be heard. You will not say a single word until the day in which I order you to shout. Then you will shout." So this order of silence during 6 days would increase the tension and expectation, making that the final shout of the 7th day be more powerful and unified, with everything organized. The strange conquest of Jericho began. Verse 11 tells us, "Thus he made that the ark of the Lord surrounded the city, giving 1 turn. Then they returned to the camp and passed there the night." The first day was fulfilled exactly according to the plan. A silent turn around the city, only interrupted by the sound of the trumpets, and then the return to the camp. This process was repeated during 6 days. The Bible summarizes it briefly in verse 14. Also, the second day they gave one turn around the city and returned to the camp, and thus they did it during 6 days. We can imagine the growing curiosity and possibly the mockery of the inhabitants of Jericho, seeing this strange procession day after day without any intent of attack. But the 7th day would be different, very different. The 7th day began early with the dawn, and the routine seemed similar to the previous days. But there was a crucial difference. This day they would give 7 turns to the city, not only one. In chapter 6, verses 15 and 16, we read, "The 7th day they got up at dawn and marched in the same manner around the city. But this time they did it 7 times. The 7th time, when the priests touched the trumpets, Joshua ordered to the people, 'Shout that the Lord has delivered to you the city.' Why giving 7 turns to a walled city like Jericho must have taken several hours. Imagine the physical tiredness, the accumulated tension, the expectations growing with each turn. The defenders of Jericho probably were confused, or perhaps even worried about this change in the pattern, because they did not leave after 1 turn like in the previous days. And then, in the culminating moment, when they completed the 7th turn of the 7th day, Joshua gave the order that they had been waiting for. Shout that the Lord has delivered to you the city. But before the shout, Joshua reminded the people 2 important things. First, that the city was consecrated to the destruction. The city, with everything that there is in it, will be consecrated to the Lord for destruction. Verse 17. This meant that everything had to be destroyed, except what specifically was kept for the treasury of the Lord. They should not take plunder for themselves. And second, he reminded the promise made to Rahab. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are in her house will live, because she hid the messengers that we sent. Verse 17. In the middle of the destruction and the judgment, God remembered his covenant of mercy with that one who had demonstrated faith. With these clear instructions, the decisive moment arrived. In verses 20 and 21 we read, "The people shouted when the priests touched the trumpets. Upon hearing the touch of the trumpets, the people launched a deafening shout, and the wall collapsed. Then they attacked the city, each one from his position, and conquered it, consecrated to destruction everything that there was in the city, as much men as women, young and old, and even the oxen, the sheep, and the donkeys, passing them to edge of sword. The impossible happened. The enormous walls of Jericho, that had resisted sieges and attacks for years, collapsed to the sound of the shout of Israel. It was not a partial or gradual collapse. It was a complete and simultaneous collapse, permitting that the Israelites entered from all the sides at the same time. There were no machines of siege. There were no battering rams against the gates. There were no ladders to climb through the walls. Only obedience, faith, and the power of God manifesting in a spectacular way in the middle of the chaos and the destruction. Joshua did not forget the promise made to Rahab. In verses 22 and 23 we read, Joshua said to the 2 men who had explored the country, "Enter and take out from there the woman with all those who belong to her, just as you swore to her." So the young spies entered and took out Rahab with her father, her mother, her brothers, and everything that belonged to her. They took out all her relatives and left them outside the camp of Israel. It is touching that the same 2 spies that Rahab had saved were now the ones in charge of saving her. It was poetic justice, and not only they saved her, but all her family, fulfilling exactly the promise that they had made to her. After taking out Rahab and her family, Israel completed the destruction of Jericho, as verse 24 tells us. Then they burned the city with everything that there was in it, although they kept for the treasury of the house of the Lord the silver, the gold, and the objects of bronze and of iron. The city that had been an amazing, threatening fortress at dawn was only smoking ruins by dusk, to make sure that Jericho would never rise again as a challenge to Israel. Joshua pronounced a curse on anyone who tried to rebuild it. In that time, Joshua pronounced this oath: "Cursed be before the Lord the man who dares to rebuild this city of Jericho. At cost of his firstborn, he will lay its foundations, and at cost of his youngest son, he will place the gates." Verse 26. This curse would be fulfilled centuries later during the reign of Ahab. 1 Kings 16:34. Finally, the Bible concludes this account with a verse that summarizes the result of this first big victory. Thus the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame extended throughout all the country. Verse 27. The miraculous way in which Jericho fell not only ensured the first victory of Israel in Canaan, but also established the reputation of Joshua as leader chosen by God, and extended the fear to the God of Israel among the neighboring peoples. The fall of Jericho demonstrated that when God promises victory, no wall, for high or thick that it is, can resist, but also taught that the victory comes through the obedience to divine instructions, even when these do not have sense from a human perspective, and in the middle of the judgment showed the mercy of God towards those who, like Rahab, put their faith in him. The joy of the victory in Jericho still was felt in the Israelite camp. They had defeated a fortified city without losing a single man. Everything seemed to indicate that the conquest of Canaan would be fast and successful. But what nobody knew was that a grave problem had arisen, a problem that would affect all the nation. Before attacking Jericho, Joshua had given a clear order in chapter 6, verses 18 and 19. He had said, "But you keep yourselves well of taking something of that which is under the curse. Not be that yourselves convert yourselves in curse when taking something of that which is under the curse, and bring thus disgrace and destruction over the camp of Israel. All the silver and the gold and the objects of bronze and of iron are consecrated to the Lord and must go to the treasury of the Lord." These words were not a simple suggestion. They were a mandate that required total obedience. All the valuable of Jericho had to go to the treasury of the Lord. Nothing had to be taken for personal use. But there was a man who did not obey. Chapter 7, verse 1, tells us, "However, the Israelites were unfaithful regarding the things that were under the curse, because Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the things that were under the curse. For that reason, the ire of the Lord ignited against the Israelites. Achan had seen something that awakened his Kedusha. Greed, and in secret had taken it for himself. Nobody saw it. Nobody knew. Or at least that thought he. But God indeed knew it. The sin of Achan soon had consequences. Joshua, without knowing what had happened, sent men to explore the small city of Ai. The spies returned confident. In chapter 7, verses 2 and 3, they say, "Joshua sent some men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Beth-aven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, 'Go up and recognize the region.' The men went up and explored Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they told him, 'Does not make lack that all the army goes up. Suffice some 2,000 or 3,000 men to defeat Ai. Do not fatigue all the army, because the enemies are few.' These spies were so sure of the victory that they suggested sending only a small part of the army. Why tire everyone for such an easy battle? Joshua accepted this advice and sent some 3,000 men, but what seemed a sure victory converted itself in a shameful defeat. Verse 4 and 5 tell thus, "That went up some through, all men, but were defeated by the men of Ai. The men of Ai killed some 36 Israelites and pursued the others from the gate of the city until Shebarim and defeated them in the descent. For that reason, the people discouraged completely. This defeat was a devastating blow for Israel. Not only had they lost 36 men, but the army had fled in panic. Their confidence had converted itself in fear. Where was God? Why had he not given them the victory? Like in Jericho, Joshua was heartbroken. Verse 6 shows his profound anguish. Then Joshua rent his garments and prostrated himself face to earth before the ark of the Lord until dusk, along with the elders of Israel, and they threw dust over their head. This was an expression of extreme pain in the Hebrew culture. Tearing the garments and covering oneself with dust showed a profound suffering. Joshua did not understand what had happened, had followed the instructions of God faithfully. Why now gave them the back? In his anguish, Joshua cried to God. In verses 7 to 9, he says, "Ah, Lord God," exclaimed Joshua, "Oh, for what made you cross the Jordan to this people, to deliver us in hands of the Amorites and destroy us? Oh, that we had stayed at the other side of the Jordan. Pardon me, Lord, but what can I say now that Israel has given the back before its enemies? The Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the country will find out about this. They will surround us and erase our name from the earth. And what will you do then for your great name?" Joshua feared that this defeat was only the principle of the end. If the Canaanites found out that Israel had been defeated, they would unite against them and destroy them. All the mission of possessing the promised land seemed to be in danger. But the response of God revealed the true problem. In verses 10 to 12, the Lord tells him, "Get up. Why do you prostrate thus? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, the one that I ordered them to fulfill. They have taken things that were under the curse. They have stolen them and have hidden them among their belongings. For that reason, the Israelites cannot make front to their enemies. They give the back before them, because they have converted themselves into motive of curse. I will not keep being with you if you do not destroy what is under the curse." Now everything made sense. It was not that God had abandoned Israel. It was Israel that had separated from God through the sin. A single man had disobeyed, but all the people suffered the consequences. Thus, of serious was the matter of the holiness for God. The only solution was to identify and eliminate the sin of the camp. God gave precise instructions to Joshua about how to find the culprit and how to deal with him. The purification of the camp had to be complete, with the heart heavy but resolute. Joshua prepared to purify the camp of Israel. It would not be an easy task, nor pleasant, but it was necessary to restore the relationship with God. In chapter 7, verses 13 to 15, the Lord gives him clear instructions. "Get up and purify the people. Tell them, 'Purify yourselves for tomorrow, because thus says the Lord, God of Israel, there is something cursed in the middle of you. Israel, you will not be able to make front to your enemies until you remove from the middle of you what is under the curse. Tomorrow you will present yourselves by tribes. The tribe that the Lord points out will present itself by clans. The clan that the Lord points out will present itself by families. The family that the Lord points out will present itself man by man. The one who is caught with the things that are under the curse will be burned along with everything that belongs to him, because he has violated the covenant of the Lord and has committed an infamy in Israel." The method of identification would be by elimination, beginning with the 12 tribes, then passing to the clans, the families, and finally to the individuals. God himself would direct this process to point out the culprit. Joshua acted immediately. Verse 16 says, Joshua got up very early in the morning and made that Israel presented itself by tribes, and was pointed out the tribe of Judah. To surprise of many, the tribe pointed out was that of Judah. One of the most prominent and respected, this demonstrated that nobody was above the law of God without matter his position or lineage. The process continued each time getting closer more to the culprit. Verses 17 and 18 tell, made that presented themselves the clans of Judah, and was pointed out the clan of Zerah. Made that presented itself the clan of Zerah, family by family, and was pointed out the family of Zabdi. Finally made that presented itself that family man by man, and was pointed out Achan, son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah. The culprit had been identified. It was Achan, a man of the tribe of Judah. Now, confronted with the divine evidence, he could not keep hiding his sin. Joshua approached him with a mix of firmness and compassion. Verse 19 shows how he spoke to him. Then Joshua said to Achan, "My son, give glory and praise to the Lord, God of Israel, and confess to me what you have done. Do not hide anything from me." It is noteworthy how Joshua addresses Achan as my son, showing a paternal spirit. Even in this moment of discipline, there was no hate in his heart, only the desire to restore the purity of the people. Finally, Achan confessed in verses 20 and 21, admits, "It is true," responded Achan. "I have sinned against the Lord, God of Israel. This is what I did. Among the plunder I saw a beautiful mantle of Babylon, 200 silver coins, and a bar of gold of 500 grams of weight. I coveted them so much that I took them. I have hidden them under earth in the middle of my tent, with the silver below everything." The confession of Achan reveals the progression of the sin. Saw, coveted, took, and hid. Started with a look, then a disordered desire, followed by the action of taking the prohibited, and finally, the attempt of hiding it. This pattern is common in many moral falls. To confirm the confession, Joshua sent messengers to the tent of Achan. Verses 22 and 23 relate. Then Joshua sent some messengers who went running until the tent, and effectively there was everything hidden with the silver below. They took all those things from the tent, took them to Joshua and to all the Israelites, and put them before the Lord. The evidence was undeniable. The stolen objects were exactly where Achan had said. His confession arrived too late to avoid the punishment, but at least he recognized his guilt before God and the people. The punishment was severe, as God had ordered. Verses 24 to 26 describe what happened. Then Joshua, along with all Israel, took Achan, son of Zerah, the silver, the mantle, and the bar of gold, and also his sons and daughters, his oxen and donkeys and sheep, his tent, and everything that belonged to him, and took them to the valley of Achor. There Joshua said, "What disgrace have you brought to us? Well, today the Lord will bring the disgrace to you." And all Israel stoned him, and afterwards they burned everything. Over Achan, they piled up a big pile of stones that remains until today. Thus the Lord calmed from his burning ire. For that reason, that place is called Valley of Achor until today. This punishment may seem extremely harsh to us today, but it shows the seriousness with which God saw this sin in that critical moment of the history of Israel. The valley where this event occurred received the name of Achor, which means problem or perturbation, reminding to the future generations the consequences of disobeying God. With the sin of Achan already treated, God was ready to give to Israel a new opportunity against Ai. However, the strategy would be completely different. In chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, we read, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, 'Do not have fear nor be discouraged. Take with you all the men of war and go up to attack Ai. Look, I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. You will do to Ai and its king the same that you did to Jericho and its king, with the difference that now they will be able to take for themselves the plunder and the livestock. Prepare an ambush behind the city.'" This time God not only promised the victory, but also permitted the Israelites to stay with the plunder, and in difference of Jericho, where the walls fell miraculously. Now they would use a military strategy, the ambush. Joshua gathered his men and explained the plan in detail. In verses 3 to 8 is described the strategy. "So Joshua prepared with all the men of war to go up against Ai, chose 30,000 brave warriors, and sent them of night with these instructions. Listen well. You will prepare an ambush behind the city. Do not distance yourselves too much from the city and be all alert. I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. And when they come out against us like the first time, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have distanced them from the city. Well, they will think, 'They flee from us like the first time, while we flee from them.' You will come out from the ambush and will take possession of the city. The Lord your God will deliver it into your hands. When you have taken the city, will set fire to it. Do what the Lord has said. Look that I have given you instructions." The strategy was intelligent. A part of the army would hide behind the city. The rest with Joshua would attack from the front, and then would pretend to flee equal that the time before. This would attract the defenders out of the city, moment in which the ambushed soldiers would enter and take control of Ai. Verses 9 to 13 show how they positioned themselves for the attack. Joshua sent them, and they went to the place of the ambush and posted themselves between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. And Joshua passed that night with the people. Joshua got up very early in the morning, passed review to the people, and went up against Ai. He with the elders of Israel at the head of the people. All the men of war who were with him went up and approached, arrived in front of the city, and camped to the north of Ai, remaining the valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken some 500 men and had put them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city, thus disposed to the people. All the camp to the north of the city, and its ambush to the west of the city. That night Joshua advanced until the middle of the valley. The position was perfect, with soldiers to the north and to the west of the city. They had Ai surrounded. The 500 men mentioned appear to be a special group inside the 30,000 originals positioned strategically for the final ambush. The plan functioned exactly as had been previewed. In verses 14 to 17, we see the reaction of the king of Ai. When the king of Ai saw the situation, he and all the people of the city got up hurriedly and went out early to face Israel in battle in the place in front of the Arabah. But he did not know that they had put an ambush to him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be defeated before them and fled by the way of the desert. Then all the people who were in Ai were convoked to pursue them, and pursued Joshua, being thus distanced from the city. Not remained man in Ai nor in Bethel who did not go out after Israel, left the city open for pursuing Israel. The king of Ai fell directly in the trap. Believing that Israel fled like the time before, mobilized all his men to pursue them, leaving the city completely unprotected. Even the men of the neighboring city of Bethel joined to the pursuit, seeking to share the apparent victory. Now was the time for the second phase of the plan. In verse 18, God gives to Joshua the signal. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Extend towards Ai the javelin that you have in your hand." because I will deliver it into your hands." And Joshua extended towards the city the javelin that had in his hand. This would be the signal so that the ambushed troops entered in action. Similar to when Moses extended his staff, the extended javelin of Joshua signaled the decisive moment of the battle. Verses 19 and 20 describe what happened to continuation. As soon as he extended his hand, the ambushed ones got up quickly from their place, ran, entered the city, took it, and hurried to set fire to it. When the men of Ai looked back and saw that the smoke of the city rose to the sky, did not have to where to flee, because the Israelites who fled towards the desert turned against their pursuers. The trap closed perfectly. The warriors of Ai were now trapped between two Israelite forces, the troops of Joshua, who had pretended to flee and now turned against them, and the soldiers of the ambush coming out of the burning city. Verse 21 shows the moment in which Joshua and his men saw the signal of smoke. When Joshua and all Israel saw that the ones of the ambush had taken the city and that the smoke of the city rose, turned back and attacked the men of Ai, it was a total victory. Verses 22 and 23 describe the result. The other Israelites went out of the city against them, in manner that the ones of Ai remained in the middle of the Israelites, with ones of one side and others of the other. And the Israelites killed them until not remained anyone who survived or escaped, but captured alive to the king of Ai and took him before Joshua. In difference of the first failed battle, this time the victory was complete. No warrior of Ai survived, except the king who was captured alive for an account adjustment final. Once that the battle ended and the victory was assured, Israel completed the conquest of Ai, following the instructions of God. In chapter 8, verses 24 to 26, we read, "When Israel finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field and in the desert, where they had pursued them, and all of them had fallen to edge of sword until being exterminated, all the Israelites returned to Ai and also passed its inhabitants to edge of sword. The number of those who fell that day, men and women, was 12,000 all the inhabitants of Ai, because Joshua did not withdraw his hand with which he had extended the javelin, until he had destroyed completely to all the inhabitants of Ai." The destruction of Ai was complete. 12. Shakoto Digu. 0 people died that day, all the population of the city. Joshua maintained his extended javelin during all the battle, similar to when Moses maintained his raised arms during the battle against the Amalekites. In difference of Jericho, where everything had to be destroyed, in Ai the Israelites could stay with part of the plunder. Verses 27 and 28 say, "Israel took for itself only the livestock and the spoils of that city, conform, in accordance with the word that the Lord had commanded to Joshua." Joshua burned Ai and converted it in a pile of permanent ruins, in a desolation until today. This fulfilled exactly what God had promised at the beginning, that they could take the plunder and the livestock for themselves. The city itself, however, was reduced to permanent ruins, a visible testimony of the divine judgment. The king of Ai received a special treatment. Verses 29 tells us, "To the king of Ai he hanged of a tree until sunset. At the setting of the sun, Joshua commanded that they lowered his body of the tree and threw it to the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised over him a big pile of stones that remains until today." This treatment of the enemy king was symbolic. Hanging his body of a tree was a way of showing that had fallen under curse. However, following the law of Moses in Deuteronomy 21:23, the body could not remain hanging during the night by what was lowered at sunset. The pile of stones over his tomb would serve as another permanent reminder of the victory of Israel. The conquest of Ai represented more than a simple military victory. It was a redemption of their previous failure, showed that when Israel was in correct relation with God and followed his instructions, no enemy could resist. The defeat had converted itself in victory. The shame in honor. For Israel, the lesson was clear. The obedience brings blessing. The disobedience brings defeat. And God, in His mercy, always offers a second opportunity when there is repentance and purification. After the victories in Jericho and Ai, Joshua did something that could seem surprising. In place of continuing immediately with more military conquests, conducted the people in a religious ceremony. In chapter 8, verses 30 to 32, we read, "Then Joshua built an altar to the Lord, God of Israel, in Mount Ebal, as Moses, servant of the Lord, had commanded to the children of Israel. According to it is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones, over which nobody had raised tool of iron. Over it offered holocausts to the Lord, and sacrificed offerings of peace. Right there over the stones, Joshua wrote a copy of the law of Moses that he had written before the children of Israel. This event shows the spiritual priority of Joshua before continuing with the conquest. It was essential to renew the covenant with God. The altar built in Mount Ebal followed the exact specifications that Moses had given in Deuteronomy 27:6, had to be of natural stones, uncut, with tools to preserve its natural purity. Over this altar offered two types of sacrifices: holocausts that burned completely, symbolizing total dedication to God, and offerings of peace that included a shared meal, symbolizing communion with God. These sacrifices were acts of adoration and thanksgiving for the victories received. Besides, Joshua wrote the law of Moses over stones. This probably refers to the 10 Commandments, or perhaps parts of the book of Deuteronomy. This written copy of the law would serve as a permanent reminder of the conditions of the covenant between God and Israel. The location of this ceremony was significant. Verses 33 and 34 tell us, "All Israel, with its elders, officers, and judges, was standing to both sides of the ark, before the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, as much foreigners as natives. The half of them was in front of Mount Gerizim, and the other half in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, servant of the Lord, had commanded before to bless the people of Israel." After this, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, in accordance with everything that is written in the book of the law. Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim were two mountains that formed a natural valley between them, near the city of Shechem. Moses had ordered specifically in Deuteronomy 11:29 and 27:12 that when Israel entered in the Promised Land, they should realize this ceremony with the half of the people in Mount Gerizim to pronounce the blessings, and the other half in Mount Ebal to pronounce the curses. The ceremony included the complete reading of the law, including the blessings by obedience and the curses by disobedience. It was a solemn reminder that their success in the conquest and possession of the land depended on their fidelity to the covenant with God. It is noteworthy that everyone participated in this ceremony. As mentions verse 35, there was no word of everything that Moses commanded, that Joshua did not read before all the assembly of Israel, included the women, the children, and the foreigners who lived among them. Nobody was excluded. Men, women, children, and even the foreigners who had united to Israel participated in this renewal of the covenant. Everyone needed to understand the terms of their relationship with God. This ceremony in the Mounts Ebal and Gerizim fulfilled several important functions. First, it was an act of obedience to the specific instructions of Moses. Second, it was a form of claiming spiritually the land that they were conquering physically. And third, reminded to everyone that the ultimate purpose of the conquest was not simply to possess territory, but to establish a nation that lived according to the laws of God. The fact that Joshua interrupted the military campaigns for this religious ceremony shows clearly the priorities of Israel under his leadership. The conquest was not an end in itself. It was part of a greater purpose, establishing a holy people in a holy land, living under the holy law of a holy God. While Israel advanced in its conquest of Canaan, the peoples of the region began to react in different ways. Some prepared for war, others sought alliances, and there were those who resorted to the cunning. The Gibeonites belonged to this latter group in chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. We see first the general reaction of the Canaanite kings when they heard these things. All the kings who were at the other side of the Jordan, in the mountainous region, in the plain, and in all the coast of the Great Sea, in front of Lebanon, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hebrew, and Jebusites, united to fight as a single man against Joshua and Israel. The natural response of these peoples was to form a military coalition against the Israelites. They knew individually that they could not resist. Thus, they decided to unite forces. This alliance represented a formidable threat to Israel, but the Gibeonites, a group of Hebrew, Hivites, chose a different strategy. Verses 3 to 6 tell us their plan. When the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also acted with cunning. They went and made themselves pass by ambassadors, and took old sacks over their donkeys, and old wineskins of wine, broken and patched, and old sandals and rekasidas, mended in their feet, and old clothes over themselves. And all the bread that they brought for the way was dry and moldy. They went to Joshua to the camp in Gilgal, and told to him and the men of Israel, "We come from a distant land. Make now a covenant with us." How the Gibeonites had heard to speak of the victories of Israel, and knew that their city was in the way of the conquest. In place of fighting or fleeing, they chose to deceive Israel to save their lives. Their plan was to pass themselves by ambassadors of a distant country, outside the limits of the land that God had ordered to conquer. To create this illusion, they prepared an elaborated disguise. They carried old and worn clothes, patched wineskins, and dry and moldy bread, everything to give the impression of having realized a long journey from distant lands. Joshua and the leaders of Israel suspected of this sudden delegation. In verse 7 they question, "Perhaps you live near here. How could we make a covenant with you?" This was an important question. God had ordered specifically to Israel not to make covenants with the peoples of Canaan. If these ambassadors were really Canaanites, making an alliance with them would be to disobey directly to God. The Gibeonites continued their deception. In verse 8, they respond, "We are your servants. Who are you, and from where do you come?" asked them Joshua. Then they elaborated a convincing story. In verses 9 to 13, they said, "Your servants have come from a very distant country by cause of the name of the Lord your God. Well, we have heard of his fame, and of everything that he did in Egypt, and of everything that he did to the two kings of the Amorites, who were at the other side of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. For that reason, our elders and all the inhabitants of our land told us, 'Take provisions for the journey. Go to their encounter and tell them, "We are your servants. Make now a covenant with us." Phew. This bread of ours was hot when we took it from our houses for the journey the day we left to come to you. But now look, it is dry and made crumbs. These wineskins of wine that we filled new, look how they are broken. This clothing of ours and our sandals are worn out by the extremely long journey. Their story combined real facts with lies, mentioned events that really had occurred, like the exit of Egypt and the victories over Sihon and Og, but invented the part of coming from a distant country and presented their aged provisions as proof of their long journey. The leaders of Israel committed a crucial error in this point. Verse 14 reveals it. The men of Israel took of their provisions, but did not consult the Lord. This was their big failure. They trusted in the physical evidence before them without seeking the divine guidance. The appearances were convincing: the worn clothing, the dry bread, the patched wineskins. Everything indicated a long journey, but they did not consult to God, who would have revealed the deception. Basing themselves only in the visible evidence, Joshua took a decision that would have lasting consequences. Verses 15 and 16 tell us, Joshua made peace with them and celebrated a covenant with them of letting them live, and the princes of the congregation swore it to him. Happened that 3 days after having made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors, and that lived near. The deception only lasted 3 days. When Israel advanced in its conquest, they discovered the truth. The Gibeonites lived at only 3 days of journey inside the territory that they should conquer. They were not emissaries of a distant country, but Canaanites who should have been expelled or destroyed. The reaction of the people was of indignation. Verse 17 says, Then the sons of Israel went out and arrived at their cities at the 3rd day. Their cities were Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. Now Israel faced a moral dilemma, had made a covenant under false pretexts. Should they break their oath and attack the Gibeonites, or keep their word in spite of the deception? Verse 18 shows us their decision. But the sons of Israel did not attack them, because the princes of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, God of Israel, and all the congregation murmured against the princes. The leaders of Israel decided to honor their oath, although had been obtained with deception. For them, the sanctity of a vote made in the name of the Lord was more important than punishing the lie of the Gibeonites. This decision was not popular. The people murmured against their leaders, probably because they felt that had been tricked, and now were bound to an agreement that should not have existed. The leaders explained their reasoning in verse 19. Then princes said to all this congregation, We have sworn to you by the Lord, God of Israel, by Tanto. Now we cannot touch them. The solution that they found was a compromise. In verses 20 to 23, they decided, This we will do with them. We will let them live so that not comes ire over us by cause of the oath that we made to them. And the princes told them, Let them live. Thus they came to be woodcutters and water carriers for all the congregation, just as the princes promised them. Joshua called them and spoke to them, saying, For what have you deceived us, saying, We live very far from you, when you live in the middle of us? Now, Pies, cursed are you and never will cease of to have among you servants, woodcutters, and water carriers for the house of my God. The Gibeonites maintained their lives, but lost their liberty, converted themselves in workers for the Israelites, specifically assigned to the most humble tasks, cutting wood and drawing water for the sanctuary. When Joshua asked them why they had resorted to the deception, their response was direct and honest. In verses 24 and 25, they responded to Joshua and said, Because to your servants was told clearly that the Lord your God had commanded to his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land before you. We had much fear by our lives by cause of you and did this. Now look, we are in your hands. Do with us as it seems to you good and right to do. Their response reveals that they acted by fear to the death, had heard what God promised to Israel and what had happened in Jericho and Ai, knew that they were condemned if they did not find a form of escaping. Their deception was born of the desperation, not of the malice. Joshua respected the covenant and the decision taken. Verse 26 and 27 concludes, Thus he did with them and delivered them from the hand of the sons of Israel, and they did not kill them. And that day Joshua designated them as woodcutters and water carriers for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord until today, in the place that he chose. Already, the Gibeonites converted themselves in permanent servants of the tabernacle and later of the temple. In fact, their descendants, known as Nethinim, the given or dedicated, continued serving in the temple until much after the Babylonian exile. As is seen in books like Ezra and Nehemiah, the covenant with the Gibeonites had unexpected consequences when the Canaanite kings found out that one of the cities most important of the region had surrendered to Israel, reacted with alarm and fury. In chapter 10, verses 1 to 4, we read, "When Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and had destroyed it completely, doing with Ai and its king as had done with Jericho and its king, and that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, had big fear, because Gibeon was a big city, like one of the cities royal and greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. By which Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent message to Hoham, king of Hebron, to Piram, king of Jarmuth, to Japhia, king of Lachish, and to Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, and let us attack Gibeon, because it has made peace with Joshua and with the sons of Israel." What the surrender of Gibeon represented a strategic threat to the Canaanite kings. Gibeon was not a city it was like one of the cities royal, big and with brave warriors. Its alliance with Israel would open a direct corridor towards the heart of Canaan. Adoni-Zedek, king of Jerusalem, took the initiative of forming a coalition against Gibeon, recruited 4 neighboring kings for a combined attack. Its goal was to punish Gibeon by its treason and eliminate the strategic advantage that this alliance gave to Israel. The 5 Amorite kings did not lose time. Verse 5 tells us, "And the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, united and went up they with all their armies and camped against Gibeon and fought against it." This attack put to test immediately the covenant between Israel and Gibeon. Would Israel defend its new allies? The Gibeonites did not hesitate in soliciting help. Verse 6 relates, "Then the men of Gibeon sent to say to Joshua to the camp in Gilgal, Do not abandon your servants. Go up soon to us and save us and help us, because all the kings of the Amorites who inhabit the mountainous region have united against us." It was a decisive moment. Joshua could ignore this request and let the Gibeonites suffered the consequences of their previous deception, or could honor the covenant that he had made, although it was based in a deception, and risk his troops to defend to a people who had deceived them. The response of Joshua shows his integrity. Verses 7 and 8 relate, "And Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him and all the brave men, and the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear them, because I have delivered them in your hands. None of them will be able to make front to you." Joshua not only decided to honor the covenant, but mobilized all his army, including his best warriors, for the battle. The military operation that followed was notable by its rapidity and surprise. Verse 9 says, "Joshua, puis, arrived suddenly to them, having gone up all the night from Gilgal." This forced march during the night shows the determination of Joshua. The distance between Gilgal and Gibeon was considerable, probably some 25 kilometers, with an ascent from the valley of the Jordan until the central mountains of Canaan. Marching all the night with a complete army required resistance and discipline, especially considering the mountainous terrain. The surprise attack had the desired effect. Verse 10 describes the outcome. "And the Lord filled them of confusion before Israel and struck them with big mortality in Gibeon, Gibbon, and pursued them by the way that goes up to Beth Horon, and struck them until Azekah and Makkedah. The battle began in Gibeon and converted itself in a pursuit along the way that goes up to Beth Horon. The 5 kings and their armies fled in disorder, with the Israelite forces stepping on their heels. But the most extraordinary was about to come. In verses 11 we read, "And while they fled from Israel to the descent of Beth Horon, the Lord threw from the sky big stones over them until, and they died. Were more those who died by the stones of hail than those that the sons of Israel killed to sword." The God himself intervened directly in the battle with a devastating hailstorm. This was not ordinary hail, but big stones that fell selectively over the Amorite armies in flight, killing more enemies than the Israelite swords. This divine intervention demonstrated that the battle was not only between human armies, but part of a broader spiritual conflict. God was fighting for Israel, confirming his election of this people and his plan for the land of Canaan. While the battle continued and the enemies fled, Joshua did something astonishing that remained registered forever in the history. In chapter 10, verse 12 and 13, we read, "Then Joshua spoke to the Lord, the day in which the Lord delivered the Amorites before the sons of Israel, and said in presence of Israel, 'Sun, stop over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ayalon.' And the sun stopped, and the moon stood still, until the nation took vengeance of its enemies. Is not this written in the book of Jasher? And the sun stood still in the middle of the sky, and did not hurry to set almost a whole day." This is one of the most extraordinary miracles registered in the Bible. Joshua, seeing that the day ended, and that many enemies still could escape in the darkness, asked for more daylight to complete the victory. And God responded in a spectacular manner, stopping the apparent movement of the sun and the moon in the sky. The text mentions specifically that this event was so notable that remained registered in the book of Jasher, an ancient collection of poems and heroic accounts that has been lost with the time. The inclusion of this reference underlines the historicity of the event. It was not a later legend, but an occurrence witnessed and documented by the contemporaries. Verse 14 emphasizes the unique of this miracle. "And there was no day like that one, neither before nor after of it, when the Lord listened to the voice of a man, because the Lord fought for Israel." This event has no parallel in the biblical history. It was not simply that God fought for Israel, he had done it many times, but that he responded to the specific petition of a man to alter the normal functioning of the celestial bodies. Have been proposed many scientific explanations for this miracle across the centuries. Some suggest an unusual refraction of light, others an eclipse, and others a real slowing of the rotation of the earth. The Bible does not explain the how, only registers the what, that the light of the day extended miraculously, permitting to Israel to complete its victory. With this extra time, Joshua could pursue completely to the enemy armies. Verses 15 to 19 describe what happened with the 5 kings, and Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp in Gilgal. But the 5 kings fled and hid themselves in a cave in Makkedah, and was given notice to Joshua. The 5 kings have been found hidden in a cave in Makkedah. Then Joshua said, "Make roll big stones to the entrance of the cave, and put men next to it so that they guard them. And you do not stop, but pursue your enemies and attack their retaguardia, rear guard without leaving them enter in their cities, because the Lord your God has delivered them in your hands." The 5 kings who had initiated proudly this campaign against Gibeon now hid terrified in a cave. Joshua, showing his military cunning, did not interrupt the pursuit of the bulk of the enemy forces to occupy himself of them, simply locked them temporarily and continued the battle. Once that the principal battle ended, Joshua returned to occupy himself of the captive kings. Verses 22 to 25 relate. Then said Joshua, "Open the entrance of the cave and take out of it to those 5 kings." Gatitan, and they did it thus, and took out of the cave to those 5 kings, to the king of Jerusalem, to the king of Hebron, to the king of Jarmuth, to the king of Lachish, and to the king of Eglon. And when they had taken out those kings before Joshua, called Joshua to all the men of Israel, and said to the captains of the men of war who had gone with him, "Approach and put your feet over the necks of these kings." And they approached and put their feet over their necks. Joshua said to them, "Do not fear nor be scared. Be strong and courageous, because thus will the Lord to all your enemies against whom you fight." This act of putting the feet over the necks of the kings was symbolic, represented the complete submission of these rulers and their kingdoms to Israel. Also was a lesson for the Israelite military leaders. Thus, as these powerful kings had been defeated, also would be all their future enemies. After this demonstration, the kings were executed. Verses 26 and 27 say, "After this, Joshua struck them and killed them, and made them hang in 5 trees, and remained hanging in the trees until sunset. And at the setting of the sun, commanded Joshua that they lowered them of the trees, and threw them in the cave where they had hidden themselves, and put big stones to the entrance of the cave that remain until today." Following the law of Moses, the bodies were lowered before dusk. The cave, which had been their temporary refuge, converted itself in their permanent tomb, sealed with big stones as a monument to the victory of Israel. The campaign continued with the conquest of several cities of the south of Canaan. Verses 28 to 39 narrate the capture of Makkedah, Libnah, Lachish, Eglon, Hebron, and Debir. In each case, Joshua applied the same strategy that had used in Jericho and Ai, destroying completely the cities and their inhabitants. Verse 40 summarizes all this campaign of the south. Thus conquered Joshua all the region, the mountainous region, the Negev, the plain, and the slopes, and to all their kings, did not leave any survivor, but destroyed everything that breathed, just as the Lord, God of Israel, had commanded. The victory over the coalition of the 5 Amorite kings was complete and decisive in a single day. With the help of a miracle without precedence, Israel had defeated the principal powers of the south of Canaan. This campaign ensured all the south of the country for Israel, from Gibeon until Kadesh Barnea. As mentions verse 41, verse 42 attributes clearly the success to the divine intervention. Joshua conquered of a time to all these kings and their lands, because the Lord, God of Israel, fought for Israel. And finally, verse 43 concludes this epic chapter. And Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp in Gilgal. The battle had ended, at least for now. Joshua and his warriors returned to their base in Gilgal, without doubt, tired, but triumphant, having witnessed some of the most astonishing miracles of the history. The day in which the sun stopped would convert itself in a legend that would pass from generation to generation, a testimony of the power of God and of his commitment of giving the promised land to his people. After the big victory over the kings of the south, Israel had control over all the mountainous regions central and southern of Canaan. But the conquest was not complete. Remained the north, where powerful kingdoms still represented a threat in chapter 11, verses 1 to 5. The Bible tells us how a big alliance was formed against Israel. When Jabin, king of Hazor, heard this, sent message to Jobab, king of Madon, to the king of Simron, to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings who were in the mountainous region of the north. in the Arabah to the south of Cinnereth, in the plain and in the heights of Dor, to the Occident. The Canaanites of the Orient and of the Occident, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites in the mountainous region, and the Hivites to the foot of Hermon in the land of Mizpah. And went out they and all their armies with them, much people, like the sand that is to the shore of the sea in multitude, with very much horses and chariots. And this coalition was bigger and more powerful than that of the kings of the south, had numerous soldiers, and something that Israel did not possess: horses and chariots of war, the most advanced military technology of the epoch. Before this threat, Joshua was animated by God in verse 6. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not have fear of them, because tomorrow to this hour I will deliver to all of them dead before Israel. You will hamstring their horses and will burn their chariots with fire." Joshua did not wait for them to attack. In verse 7 we read, "And Joshua and all the people of war with him came suddenly against them next to the waters of Merom." This tactic of surprise attack resulted in a complete victory for Israel, as says verse 8. "And the Lord delivered them in hands of Israel, and struck them and pursued them until Sidon the Great, and until Misrephoth-Maim, and until the valley of Mizpah, to the orient, and struck them until not leaving them anyone." After defeating the enemy army, Joshua directed himself to Hazor, the principal city. Verses 10 and 11 describe what occurred. "And returning Joshua, took in that time to Hazor and killed, to sword to its king. Well, Hazor had been before the head of all these kingdoms, and they killed to edge of sword, to everything that in it had life, destroying it completely. Did not remain anything that breathed, and to Hazor put fire." The campaign continued with the conquest of other cities. But in difference of Hazor, Joshua decided not to burn the other cities, as mentions verse 13, but to all the cities that were over hills, did not burn them Israel. Uniquely to Hazor burned Joshua. With these victories in the north, the active phase of the conquest arrived to its end. Verse 23 concludes, "Took, pues, Joshua all the land, in accordance with everything that the Lord had said to Moses, and delivered it Joshua to the Israelites by inheritance, in accordance with its distribution according to its tribes, and the land rested of the war." Before distributing the land among the tribes, the book of Joshua makes a recount of all the victories obtained. This summary helped the people to see the magnitude of what God had done for them. First, in chapter 12, verses 1 to 6, are remembered the conquests to the east of the Jordan that occurred during the life of Moses. These are the kings of the land that the sons of Israel defeated, and whose land possessed at the other side of the Jordan, towards where the sun rises, from the stream of Arnon until Mount Hermon, and all the Arabah to the orient. Sihon, king of the Amorites, who inhabited in Heshbon, and the territory of Og, king of Bashan. Then verses 7 to 24 list the victories of Joshua to the west of the Jordan. "And these are the kings of the land that defeated Joshua and the sons of Israel at the other side of the Jordan towards the Occident." The total is impressive, as says verse 24. In total, 31 kings. This balance shows the fulfillment of the promise of God to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The promised land had been conquered, although remained pockets of Canaanite resistance. The principal cities and regions were now under Israelite control. God had fulfilled his word. Chapter 13 begins mentioning the areas that still remained by conquering. As says verse 1, "Being Joshua already old, entered in years, the Lord said to him, 'You are already old, of advanced age. and remains still much land to possess. But that although remained territories by possessing, it was time to pass to the following phase. Distribute the land among the tribes, so that each one could settle and complete the conquest in its own region. With the main phase of the conquest completed, arrived the moment to divide the land among the tribes of Israel. This division was not aleatory, but guided by God Himself. In chapter 13, verse 7, God instructs Joshua, "Distribute now this land in heritage to the 9 tribes and to the half-tribe of Manasseh." The other 2 tribes in Media, Reuben, Gad, and the other half of Manasseh, already had received their territory to the east of the Jordan during the life of Moses. The method to distribute the land is described in chapter 14, verse 2. By lot was given to them their heritage, as the Lord had commanded by means of Moses to the 9 tribes and to the half-tribe. This lot was not a simple game of chance, but a religious act in which was sought the divine will. The people believed that God guided the result of the lot according to His perfect plan. Before beginning the general lot, there was a special case. Caleb, one of the 2 spies who had brought a positive report of Canaan 40 years before, asked for a specific portion. In chapter 14, verse 6 to 12, Caleb reminds to Joshua the promise that Moses had made to him. "You know what the Lord had said to Moses, man of God, respecting to me and to you in Kadesh Barnea. Moses swore that day, saying, 'Certainly the land that heard your foot will be for you and for your sons in perpetual heritage, by as much you fulfilled following the Lord my God.'" In spite of having 85 years, Caleb was ready to conquer his portion that included territory where lived the feared Anakites. His petition was granted, as we read in verse 13. Joshua then blessed him and gave to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, to Hebron by heritage. Then began the distribution for the tribes, starting with Judah, one of the most important. Chapter 15 details minutely the limits and cities of this tribe, including how Caleb conquered Hebron and how his nephew Othniel captured Debir. The following portions were for the tribes descendants of Joseph, Ephraim, chapter 16, and Manasseh, chapter 17. The half of Manasseh already had territory to the east of the Jordan, thus now was assigned the territory to the other half of the tribe, to the west of the Jordan. An interesting detail appears in chapter 17, verses 3 to 6, where the daughters of Zelophehad had received their heritage. These women had asked to Moses that allowed them to inherit the portion of their father, who had died without sons males. Moses consulted to God, who approved their petition, establishing an important precedent over the rights of the women in the Israelite society. To complete the distribution was moved the tabernacle, the sacred tent that contained the Ark of the Covenant, from Gilgal to Shiloh, a place more central. From there, Joshua sent teams to map the rest of the territory. As says chapter 18, verse 4, "Designate of among you 3 men by each tribe, so that I send them and they get up and tour the land and describe it in accordance with their heritages and return to me." Basing themselves in these maps, was completed the distribution for the 7 remaining tribes. Benjamin, chapter 18, Simeon, Zebulun, Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and Dan. Chapter 19. As final note of this section, Joshua himself received a city. Chapter 19, verse 49 and 50 tells us, "And finished to distribute the land in heritage by their territories. And the sons of Israel gave heritage to Joshua, son of Nun, in middle of them, according to the word of the Lord. They gave him the city that he asked, Timnath-Serah, in the mount of Ephraim. And he rebuilt the city and inhabited in it. It is significant that Joshua received his portion at the end. As leader, he made sure that each tribe and family received their heritage before taking his own, showing a disinterested spirit that characterized his leadership. Once distributed the territory among the tribes, God indicated to Joshua that established the cities of refuge, a special provision inside the legal Israelite system. In chapter 20, verses 1 to 3, we read, "Spoke the Lord to Joshua, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel and tell them, Designate yourselves the cities of refuge, of which I spoke to you by means of Moses, so that may be welcomed there the homicide who killed to anyone without intention and not knowingly, and will serve you of refuge against the avenger of the blood, Shtichem." These cities fulfilled a crucial function in a society where did not exist a police force or a centralized judicial system. When someone killed another person, the closest relative of the deceased, called avenger of the blood, had the duty to seek justice. This could lead easily to cycles of revenge and uncontrolled violence. The cities of refuge offered a solution. Whoever killed someone accidentally could flee to one of these cities and receive protection until a fair trial could be realized. As explained verses 4 to 6, "And the one who is welcomed to some of those cities will present himself to the gate of the city and will expose his reasons to ears of the elders of that city. And they will receive him with themselves inside the city and will give him place so that he inhabits with them. If the avenger of the blood follows him, will not deliver in his hand to the homicide. By as much he killed his neighbor without intention and without having had with him before enmity. And he will stay in that city until he appears in trial before the congregation, and until the death of the one who were high priest in that time. Then the homicide will be able to return to his city and to his house, and to the city of where fled. Were established 6 cities of refuge strategically located, so that nobody in Israel were to more than a day of journey of some of them. Verses 7 and 8 tell us which ones were. Then designated to Kadesh in Galilee in the Mount of Naphtali, to Shechem in the Mount of Ephraim, and to Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron in the Mount of Judah, and at the other side of the Jordan of Jericho. To the orient, designated to Bezer in the desert, in the plain of the tribe of Reuben, to Ramoth in Gilead, of the tribe of Gad, and to Golan in Bashan, of the tribe of Manasseh. 3 cities were to the west of the Jordan, and 3 to the east, ensuring equitable access for all the tribes. This disposition shows the concern of the divine law for balanced justice, protecting as much the right of the victims to the justice as the right of the accused to a fair trial. After establishing the cities of refuge, was proceeded to assign cities for the tribe of Levi. In difference of the other tribes, the Levites did not receive a continuous territory, but cities dispersed by all the land of Israel. In chapter 21, verses 1 and 2, we read how the Levites approached to ask for their cities. The chiefs of the fathers of the Levites came to the priest Eleazar, to Joshua, son of Nun, and to the chiefs of the fathers of the tribes of the sons of Israel, and spoke to them in Shiloh in the land of Canaan, saying, "The Lord commanded by means of Moses that cities were given to us to inhabit with their ejidos, pasture lands for our livestock." This petition was based in what God had commanded to Moses. The Levites were dedicated to the religious service and did not have time to cultivate big extensions of land. In place of that, would live of the tithes and offerings of the people, and needed only cities to live and nearby pastures for their animals. The response was positive, as says verse 3, "Then the sons of Israel gave of their own heritage to the Levites in accordance with the mandate of the Lord. These cities with their pasture lands." The rest of the chapter details how were distributed 48 cities between the 3 main Levitical clans, the Kohathites, descendants of Kohath, That included the priests, the Gershonites, and the Merarites. The cities were taken proportionally of all the tribes, as explains verse 41. All the cities of the Levites in middle of the possession of the sons of Israel were 48 cities with their pasture lands. This dispersion of the Levites by all the territory had an important purpose, as in charge of teaching the law of God and leading the cult. Their presence in all the regions ensured that the people had access to the religious and spiritual instruction. The chapter concludes in verses 43 to 45 with a summary of how God had fulfilled all his promises. In this manner gave the Lord to Israel all the land that had sworn to give to his fathers, and possessed it and inhabited in it. And the Lord gave them rest around, in accordance with everything that had sworn to his fathers. And none of all their enemies could make them front, because the Lord delivered in his hands to all their enemies, did not lack word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel. Everything was fulfilled. This passage underlines a central theme of the book of Joshua, the fidelity of God to his promises. In spite of the obstacles and challenges, God fulfilled exactly what had promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Moses. With the land conquered and distributed, arrived the moment for the tribes that had established themselves to the east of the Jordan: Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, of returning to their territories. These tribes had promised to Moses and Joshua that would help to conquer the land to the west of the Jordan before establishing themselves in their own possessions. In chapter 22, verses 1 to 4, Joshua recognizes that have fulfilled faithfully their promise. Then Joshua called the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and told them, "You have kept everything that Moses, servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed to my voice in everything that I have commanded you. Have not left your brothers in this long time until today, but have kept the commandments of the Lord your God. Now, proves that the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as it had promised. Return and go to your tents, to the land of your possession, that Moses, servant of the Lord, gave you at the other side of the Jordan." This recognition shows how long time had been these tribes separated from their families. The conquest of Canaan had taken several years, and all that time these warriors had been far from their homes fulfilling their word. Joshua dismisses them with a blessing and an exhortation, as we see in verse 5. "Solamente, only that with diligence take care of fulfilling the commandment and the law that Moses, servant of the Lord, ordered you, that you love the Lord your God and walk in all his ways, that you keep his commandments and follow to him and serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." Jesus also reminds them that they take their part of the plunder of war, as says verse 8. "Return to your tents with big riches, with very much livestock, with silver, with gold, with bronze, with iron, and with very much clothing. Share with your brothers the plunder of your enemies." Thus, the warriors of these two tribes in Media returned to their homes to the east of the Jordan, after years of faithful service next to their brothers. Upon returning to their territories, the eastern tribes took a decision that almost provoked a civil war. In chapter 22, verse 10, we read, "And when they arrived at the limits of the Jordan, that is in the land of Canaan, the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar next to the Jordan, an altar of big appearance. Mula, when the western tribes found out of this, interpreted the construction as an act of religious rebellion. In Israel only should be an altar legitimate for sacrifices, the one that was in front of the tabernacle. To build another altar seemed a direct violation of the law of Moses and a first step towards the idolatry. The reaction was immediate and severe, as says verse 12. When heard this, the sons of Israel gathered all the congregation of the sons of Israel in Shiloh to go up to fight against them. But before initiating a war, they decided to send a delegation to investigate, led by Phinehas, son of the high priest, and 10 tribal leaders. The delegation expressed its concern in terms very harsh, remembering past sins of the people and their consequences. As we see in verses 15 to 20, the response of the eastern tribes revealed that there had been a complete misunderstanding. In verses 21 to 29, they explained that never had intention of offering sacrifices in that altar. They had built as a monument, a visible testimony of their connection with the other tribes and with the cult to the true God. In verses 26 and 27, they clarify, "By this we said, let us make now ourselves an altar, not for holocaust nor for sacrifice, but so that it is a testimony between us and you and between those who will come after us, that we can serve the Lord before him with our holocausts, with our sacrifices, and with our offerings of peace, and do not say tomorrow, your sons to ours. You do not have part in the Lord." Their concern was that with the river Jordan as natural border, the future generations could arrive to consider to the eastern tribes as separated or excluded of the people of God. The altar would serve as a permanent reminder of their spiritual unity, in spite of the geographical separation. This explanation tranquilized completely to the delegation. In verse 30, we read the reaction of Phinehas. Hearing Phinehas, the priest, and the princes of the congregation, and the chiefs of the thousands of Israel that with him were, the words that spoke the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the sons of Manasseh seemed well to them. In place of provoking a war, the incident ended reinforcing the unity of the people. Verse 34 concludes, "And the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad put by name to the altar Ed, because it is testimony between us that the Lord is God." The word Ed means witness or testimony in Hebrew. This episode shows the importance of the clear communication and of not assuming the worst about the intentions of the others. Also highlights how the unity of the people of God did not depend only of the geographical proximity, but of their common adoration to the same God, having completed their mission of conquering and distributing the promised land. Joshua, now old, gathered all Israel to give them his last instructions. This discourse, registered in the chapters 23 and 24, summarizes the essence of his leadership and his concern for the future of the people. In chapter 23, verse 2, begins, "Joshua called all Israel to its elders, to its chiefs, to its judges, and to its officers, and told them, I already am old and advanced in years." Then remembers how God has fulfilled all his promises, giving them the land and defeating their enemies, but also warns that the future promises of God, as much for blessing as for judgment, also will be fulfilled depending on the fidelity of the people. This warning is particularly clear in verses 12 and 13. Because if they separate and unite to what remains of these nations that have remained with you, and if they contract marriage with them, mixing yourselves with them and they with you, know that the Lord your God will not continue throwing these nations before you, but they will be to you by snare and by trap, by whip in your sides, and by thorns in your eyes, until they perish of this good land that the Lord your God has given you. In his second discourse in chapter 24, Joshua reviews all the history of the relation between God and Israel, from the call of Abraham until the conquest of Canaan. This historical recount has a clear purpose: to show the constant fidelity of God across the generations. Then, in verses 14 and 15 arrives to the culminating point of his message, defying to the people to take a definitive decision. Now, pues, fear the Lord and serve him with integrity and in truth, and take away the gods to which served your fathers, at the other side of the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if bad it seems to you to serve the Lord, choose today whom you will serve. If to the gods to which served your fathers when they were at the other side of the river, or to the gods of the Amorites in whose land you inhabit. But I and my house will serve the Lord. This famous declaration, I and my house will serve the Lord, thus summarizes the life and the leadership of Joshua. In spite of all the difficulties and challenges, had remained faithful to God and was decided to continue thus next to his family, independently of what decided the rest of the people. His example inspired the people, who responded in miles, unanimously. Verse 16. Then the people responded and said, Never such thing happen that we leave the Lord to serve other gods. To seal this renewed commitment, Joshua established a formal covenant with the people, as say verses 25 and 26. Thus Joshua made covenant with the people that day, and gave them statutes and laws in Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and taking a big stone, raised it there under the oak that was next to the sanctuary of the Lord. This stone would serve as witness of the commitment that the people had made, a visible reminder for the future generations. Little after this discourse, Joshua died to the age of 110 years, as tells us verse 29. After of these things died Joshua, son of Nun, servant of the Lord, being of 110 years, and was buried in his own heritage in Timnath-Serah, in the mounts of Ephraim, the city that had been given to him after distributing all the land among the tribes. His legacy was powerful, as indicates verse 30, and served Israel the Lord all the time of Joshua and all the time of the elders who survived to Joshua, and who knew all the works that the Lord had done for Israel. Joshua had completed the mission that Moses started, had led the people to the promised land, conquered territories, distributed the heritage, and the most important, had maintained the people faithful to God. His leadership combined bravery, military, administrative wisdom, and, above all, spiritual devotion, leaving an example that inspired an entire generation to follow the Lord. And thus ends our journey through the book of Joshua. We have seen how a common man converted himself in an extraordinary leader, how impenetrable walls fell with only the sound of trumpets and shouts, and how God fulfilled faithfully each of his promises. The story of Joshua is not only an ancient account, it is a living message for us today. Teaches us that the biggest obstacles can fall when we trust in God, that the obedience brings blessings, and that God always fulfills his promises, although sometimes not in the time or the form that we expect. Has liked to you this story, has inspired to you to see how God used Joshua to achieve the impossible. Then, help me to share these powerful biblical teachings with more people. Give like to this video, subscribe to our channel to not miss our next biblical stories, and share it with friends and family who need a message of hope and faith. Remember, thus as Joshua conquered the promised land one step to the time, you also can face your own Jerichos with the help of God. See you in the next biblical story.